can tell me which color is the frontal lobe.
The orange.
Orange. Parietal, green. Temporal, blue. Occipital, what do you want to call that color? Kind of a teal, gray, something like that. Yeah, the one in the back. This is the cerebellum. The fifth lobe, the insula, like insulated. If you pull the temporal lobe out, there's this fissure, and then inside it, you can see the insula. General functions of the cerebrum are to interpret your sensory input, so all the messages coming from your skin, your eyes, etc. It processes them and makes sense out of them. Controls all your voluntary functions like movement and speech. Stores and retrieves your memory. And then a lot of the things that you would think about as being part of your brain, like intelligence, what you're skilled at, emotions, personality. These are all in the cerebrum. It does your thinking. Within the cerebral cortex, there are various regions with specific functions. These are classified as sensory areas, motor areas, or association areas where they're doing some processing beyond just taking in the input or sending out the output. Let's clear this, get a bigger cerebrum to start marking these areas on. The frontal lobe is clearly defined. It's got a distinct sulcus at the back edge and a fissure separating it from temporal. But we have to kind of arbitrarily make the divisions between temporal, parietal, and occipital because there's no obvious sulcus to say, yeah, that's the edge. Vision. Is in the occipital lobe. And this is like, could I possibly get any further away from my eyes and still be in my brain? But that's where it is. And that's why if you bump the back of your head, you might see stars or something. Smell and hearing are both in the temporal lobe. Hearing is along the top. Gyrus. Smell is kind of inside on the other surface towards the insula, so I can't really draw it. Taste is also in there, and it's kind of partially on the frontal, partially on the insula. Touch is in the parietal lobe, and it's along this gyrus that's the anterior edge of the parietal lobe. We call that the primary sensory area. Then there's a special one that's kind of bridging the gap between sensory and association, called the sensory speech area. Another name for it is Wernicke's area. And that's about here. Put lips for speech. But you don't talk from there, you listen or read. This area is for understanding language. It's usually considered part parietal, part temporal. Some books will put it as part occipital, some as just parietal. The sensory speech area is in only one hemisphere. For most people, that's the left, but for some people, it's on the right. The other sensory areas are on both sides, and they pick up opposite sides, like the right ear goes to the left, auditory cortex is what it's called. So even in that case, you think, oh, it's in my temporal lobe, it's right by my ear, but it's by the opposite ear. Vision, it's actually not by eye, but by what you see on the left half versus the right half. Touch is the right side of my body sends the touch to the left sensory cortex. Association areas, we'll just go by what kind of things happen in each lobe. Frontal lobe is where we do a lot of the planning, problem solving, and controlling our emotions, or at least how we respond to them. Parietal lobe interprets the senses and thinks about how to express your thoughts. Temporal lobe association areas are mostly for memory. And then in the occipital lobes, they analyze the visual input. So while your visual cortex just makes a picture of the light that hits your eyes, the visual association area makes sense out of it. Like, I see some brown and these little brown circles and brown dots and a pink strip, and I know that that's a face, and because I've met her before, I know that it's Kimberly. I've heard, I don't know for sure, that what LSD actually messes with is the visual association areas. So you don't really hallucinate, you just misinterpret what you see, like a pile of spaghetti looks like worms or something. And then the motor areas, and this is where we'll finish up. The primary motor area, which signals the muscles to contract, is in the frontal lobe. That's a muscle, if you can't tell. So, both the primary motor area and primary sensory area, we have mapped out of this area controls these muscles and this controls these muscles. We know where the sensory area picks up from your body, arm, leg, limbs, etc. The motor speech area, also called Broca's area, coordinates the movements of your mouth and throat for speaking, and even your hand for writing. So Wernicke's area, or sensory speech, is for the input, making sense of the language that comes in. Motor speech area is for the output, being able to share that language with others. Damage to the motor speech area often results in stuttering, or they just can't get words out, and it can be really frustrating because people know exactly what they want to say and they just can't make their mouth do it. So this coordinates, and then the messages go through the primary motor area to the muscles. And there are other areas that coordinate other complex movements for places, things like the eyes and the hands. This maps out the functional areas of the cerebrum that we can see. Here's motor speech, primary motor, sensory speech. So this would be the sulcus that divides frontal from parietal. Here's sensory speech. Now I'm not sure if I said the right thing. That should say be primary sensory, primary motor. There's auditory and visual. And then this shows us the primary motor and sensory areas and the little person stretched out along it. So areas for the motor cortex, areas with more fine control, like the face, hands, and tongue, take up a larger portion of the brain. Similarly, for sensory areas, things that feel more detailed, like the hands and the lips, take up a larger space. And this is a tooth. So there's no motor control of your teeth, but there is sensation. We'll pick up with hemisphere dominance next week.